In today's episode, titled Leading with Purpose Values Driven Leadership in the Philippines, we will delve into how Filipino leaders align their personal traits with organizational goals. Let me get started by introducing our first guest today. Rommel Rivera, or Ripp, has started his career as an international trader of steel, metals, and other raw materials. He's been a director of a top multinational chemical distribution company for 16 years. He is an avid reader of books on psychology, philosophy, meditation, mindfulness, coaching, and leadership. One fun fact about him is that he is also an accredited Ashtanga yoga teacher. Welcome to the show, Rip.
Thank you for inviting.
It's our pleasure. Our next guest is Captain Edo Lobenia. He is a visionary leader whose work at the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology and Second Chance Philippines exemplifies excellence in public service and civic engagement. His contributions have significantly transformed the rehabilitation and reintegration landscape for former persons deprived of liberty and have set new standards for social innovation and community development in the Philippines. In August this year, Captain Edo was awarded the 21st 10 Accomplished Youth Organizations Award for his leadership in the development sector. Edo is an accomplished triathlete and an avid big bike rider. Hi, Edo. Magandang umaga.
Hello, Awi. Thank you for inviting me here.
Of course. Thank you. We'll start with our guests' leadership stories, including the challenges they face and the solutions they found. We will wrap up with a fun rapid fire segment and key takeaways. So, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode and explore the world of values driven leadership in the Philippines. Welcome, Richard, Rip, and Captain Edo. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Let's start by talking about how Filipino cultural values shape your leadership style. Siguro we can get started with Richard first. Hi, Richard.
Hi. Okay, that's a good question. I think for people that have heard me speak before, one of the things that I really try to convey is we're very much shaped and influenced by our upbringing, our educational environment, and the societal norms that we function in. But, in some cases, we kind of highlight some of the negative things, but it's a double-edged sword. A lot of the influence of our parents, it's also positive. So let me share with you my experience regarding integrity. So growing up, as you know, if you grew up in the Philippines, one of the worst thing that could happen is for your parents to be called to the school, right? Because that means you've done something wrong. Like it's okay if you can contain all your foolishness within your class and it doesn't go escalate. But as soon as your parents or your mother, my mom specifically, gets called to school, nako, that means it's serious. And so it stayed with me throughout my growing years in the sense that whatever you do, don't escalate it to the point na they have to call your mother
Matatawag.
at mapapahiya yung
Yeah.
nanay mo, right?
Right,
And,
right.
and so growing up, as I become a leader and as I become an international leader, I kind of developed this we called front page rule. So when you're trying to decide on things that what you do, you kind of base it on the fact that whatever you did, it becomes front page the next day and your mother reads it and you're willing to stand in the repercussions of that, okay yon, go ahead. But if that goes in the front page and your mother reads it and you're not willing to stand there and suffer the consequences, then don't do it. It's a very simplistic rule, but again, it just kind of highlights how much that organic influence of our parents really drive our way that we lead, especially in areas of integrity. So I use that as an example on the positive side, because sometimes we kind of highlight the fact that there are a lot of influence of our parents that are negative, but on the other side, there's also a lot that are positive that really guides us to be better leaders, better human beings, because we were grounded based on the values that they taught us.
Right, right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That brought me a lot of very positive memories and not so positive memories as well.
So your mother
Growing
got
up as
your
a
mother
not
got called to school all the time, huh?
yes. Unfortunately, she did. Not for the reasons that I wanted. What about you? Thank you, Richard. What about you, Rip?
Yeah, I mean, this is really a very interesting topic because there's so much influence about, how we were brought up, the environment we were raised in, and the beliefs plus the culture as well. But I believe if we really go back and think about it and become aware of how our parents, our grandfathers and grandmothers brought us up, the Filipino culture is so rich in terms of positive aspects. And when you look at the cultural aspects, like, we're very hospitable people. I grew up in a village wherein the whole village was welcome in our house. My parents would treat my friends as if they were family. Just the simple gesture of inviting, when Filipinos are eating, we have this attitude of, come on, let's eat, kain na. And it doesn't just extend to just saying kain na, but we really invite people to join us to eat.
Right.
And I guess there's a warm aspect in that. And I guess in leadership, you can use also that to be sensitive to the presence of another person, and it's a way of, touching the heart of an individual, of course, in leadership that you would like to lead. So many. There's bayanihan, there's compassion. Hard work is also our trait. And sometimes in hard times, we have the ability also of just laughing off. It's like a valve in a gas station. In a gas station, you'll see this valve on the side of the wall that actually releases the pressure. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess we're gonna dive into that deeper later on. But yeah, those are just a few things that I believe if we really think about it and analyze it, we are able to use all this, I would say, Filipino traits that can help you as a leader to, of course, sustain followers. Yeah.
So
Thanks for
sorry,
that.
let me
Rip.
just add to
Yeah.
that. So because
Oh.
Rip kind of mentioned something. So somebody taught me this when I came back to the Philippines. I said, you know how North Americans always say, "Hey, Awi, how are you?" Right? The way
Mm.
Filipinos greet each other is, "Hey, Awi, kumain ka na?" Right?
Yeah.
That's right.
And for me, that was a learning thing, right? Because growing up, most in North America, it's like, "How are you?" But most people don't really wait for the answer. It's more, "Hey, Rip, how are you?" But for Filipinos, it's really when you enter someone's home. To Rip's point, right? The first question is, "Kumain ka na?" Right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of encapsulates the warmth that the Rip talks about, and the welcoming and the hospitality that we. So I just wanted to kind of add to that because that was something that I learned myself. So when somebody says "kumain ka na," it's their way of saying welcome, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also add to it because people, they remember actually how you made them feel. It's very important that it's not what you say, it's not what you do, but if they feel welcome even the first time you meet them, and you made them feel at home, you made them feel seen, and you made them feel that there's care there. I guess it comes to us very authentically, and that's very important, I guess, in leadership.
Yeah. Thanks, Rip and Richard, for your inputs. Edo.
Yes, speaking of kain, nag-breakfast na ba kayo? Pero ngayon, iba na eh. I think it's more
Yes.
on
Oh,
nagkape ka
nagkape
na.
ka na. Oh,
So it's more
right.
about coffee na ngayon sa
Oh,
Pilipinas. So nakakatuwa. Nevertheless, I think Sir Rommel already mentioned, I think two, when I was reflecting when we send the guide questions, about compassion and at the same time bayanihan spirit. And maybe because for almost a decade I live in Eastern Samar, it's often hit by typhoons. So
Right.
like Bicol, Region 5, it's always hit by typhoon. I think I'm just going to share about compassion, malasakit, at the same time, bayanihan, of course, yung pakikipagkapwa, the
Mm-hmm.
interconnectedness. So I think this principle actually guided me, especially in my work in BGMP and at the same time in Second Chance Philippines, because it's already had been already my like foundation, social capital within me, being a person of this, because we wanted really to highlight that our work drives really about empathy and respect for former PDL, for this kind of people. So we wanted to see the potential of the person, even this kind of person already had been incarcerated. So because I find it, especially in the Philippines, the stigma for this kind of people. So they don't have that still the opportunity and the mental model later on for Filipino people to be able to change this kind of mindset or perception towards them. So we wanted really to foster respect, dignity, and at the same time, second chances later on, especially in the work that we do in Second Chance Philippines. I think these three, as what I've said earlier, bayanihan, malasakit, and pakikipagkapwa-tao. So I think that these are the values that really shape my leadership style, what I'm applying
Right.
right now in the government, at the same time in my work in the development sector.
Yeah, thank you, Edo. And what I notice about what that's common among your sharing is that these traits, these Filipino cultural values are definitely natural. They come natural for us, no? Hindi siya pilit. So it's relatively easy for us to cultivate our leadership style based on these cultural traits. Additional question to that is how have your specific three cultural influences, no, the parenting style, your education and societal norms, how have these influenced the way that you make decisions as leaders? Maybe this time we can start off with Rip.
There's this saying in psychology, that you show me a child up to his 7 and I'll show you the man or the woman. I think this is made famous by the psychologist Bruce Lipton. Meaning, as we grow up, since birth until we reach 7 years old, we are actually already conditioned. Majority of our conditioning has been instilled with us. And I guess I'm just very lucky that my parents really installed values, in me. And I've also seen it because as they say, in parenting, the kids don't actually follow what the parents say. The kids follow what they do. So in my part, my dad, I saw him very hardworking. I saw him having integrity in his work. I saw my dad always, reminding me that, you have to always take care of your name, always protect your name. Because no matter what happens in life, if you have a good name, you can always stand up and people will always help. But if you actually tarnish your name, it will be very difficult for you. So that always stuck with me, that values part. And then you're talking about also the knowledge educational schooling has given me. So I was also lucky that I was sent to a private school, co-ed, boys and girls, being able to relate at a young age with female,
Success, yeah.
the female sex and the males as well. So as a kindergarten student, I think I was 4 when I started studying. So that inter-social relationship was very fluid. The education during that time, there were less, I think, students in one classroom that I think gave
Right.
the teacher more focus to me. That was like just 20 years ago when I was kindergarten.
Okay. Okay.
That was around 40, I would say 47 years ago. So imagine the Philippines during that time, right? When everything was analog, right? Super analog years. But that upbringing, and I'm also lucky that we had the chance to actually run around, play.
Yeah.
The now, I mean, kids would like stay home, right? You would actually pull them to get out, but before you have to pull them out to get in, right?
Yeah, right, right.
We had the chance to play, climb up trees, bike, as long as we're home during dinner. So Filipinos, I guess before, or the Filipino parents were more in some way lenient than what we are seeing now. And yeah, of course, the societal norms that I've mentioned a while ago. I mean, the different, I think, very rich societal norms that are all positive.
Yeah.
Hospitality, yung compassion, Filipinos are very sensitive. And I guess humor also is a big thing, because in leadership, you would have to sometimes, bring in humor into challenging events. It really eases off a lot of pressure, right? Sometimes being too serious. Of course, when the task is at hand, we have to do it well. But it doesn't mean that
Yeah.
the journey of doing it well we're all going to be miserable doing it, right? So that
Right.
of achieving something can be a happy journey, right? It doesn't mean that it's a
Mm-hmm.
task, you know. So as they say, it's the journey that's important, and if you make it fun with the company you're with or the people you're with, then I guess that's the real point of being in a team.
All right. Thanks, Rip, for that. Edo, what about you? How have
Uh,
these influences played a role in your decision making as a leader?
Actually, we it's more this kind of things are actually somehow your social capital, what you have already. So, as what I've said earlier, growing up in Eastern Samar, I think one of the poorest province in our country. At early stage, I know that I really need to study hard because this is only my one-way ticket to somehow uplift the life that we have in Samar. And really lucky, got a scholarship in the Philippines through the cadetship training program at the Philippine National Police Academy. So actually, my education in PNP is somehow really instilled a sense of duty and discipline for me to be
Mm,
able to where I am right now. Up until to this day, I'm still studying actually because I wanted really to help more people, and
mm,
especially the work that we do in Second Chance Philippines. So I think it's crucial that I am blessed that I was able to have that sense of community awareness later on the challenges that we
mm.
have already in the Philippines because of this education that I had. And luckily been able to really translate it or put it into practice, creating an impact to what we're doing right now.
Right. Yeah. Very inspiring, Edo. Thank you. Richard, what about you?
Okay, before I answer the question, I have to comment both on Rip and Edo's comment because I'm writing down. They're kind of making me reminding me of what I want to say. So let me comment back on Rip's comments because it jogged up three things for me. Number one, he mentioned the fact that growing up, his father always told him, protect your name.
Name.
And so that kind of resonated with me because when I talk to people that are coming up, that are still just starting their career, I said, whatever you do, you may not last with this company and you may not stay with us, but whatever you do, always protect your reputation because that is the only thing that you walk out that door. And so a lot of people who doesn't realize that you're only as good as your reputation, and so protect it at all costs, make sure that people has a good impression on you. So that's number one. It kind of validates what Rip is saying in the sense that reputation is number one, and sometimes leaders are tempted to do short gain versus long benefit, right? And they're tempted.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a longer discussion. The second thing that I wanted to say is humor. How he says that humor is usually, I had to learn that when I came back to the Philippines. And for me, having worked internationally, sometimes I view humor as somebody that's not serious, right? And so in a very serious corporate environment, you throw in humor, sometimes it sounds out of place. But I had to adjust to that coming back to the Philippines because Rip is right. The right time at the right place, it really diffuses the tension, right? And it really kind of gets everybody back in the right mood. So I just want to point out that that's something I had to learn. There's a lot of things I had to learn. That's one thing that I had to learn. But the third thing that Rip kind of kind of jog my memory is this mentality that when we were growing up, and we're probably closer to each other's age, is that our growing up in Calapan, Oriental Mindoro, where I grew up, is our parents just let us out and then just make sure you come back for supper, right? And so
Yeah.
of course, looking back and looking at myself, I was this is early stages of resilience that when I look back. So when I was, and I think I told you the story, when I was going to Mindoro College in my elementary school, I only had an allowance of 1 peso, right? And 1 peso is for the whole day. And the problem with 1 peso is you have to last it for the break in the morning and the break in the afternoon. Well, the siopaw is 50 cents and the Coke is 50 cents. And you cannot eat siopaw without Coke, right? Like who eats siopaw without Coke and who eats Coke without siopaw? So I end up blowing the whole 1 peso in the morning. I don't have any food. And guess what? I have a cousin who always packs his lunch. And so
Nice.
every day I steal his lunch.
Was that one of the reasons why
I'm
your mom
serious.
was
And
salty?
of course, his mother and my mother are sisters, right?
Oh, right.
And so my cousin, and so he goes home and he cries to his mother and said, "What's wrong?" "Well, Richard stole my lunch again." And so his mom will talk to my mom and said, "You know what? Aren't you feeding your son? Why is he stealing my son's lunch?" And and my mom had to come, and I had to explain to her that, "Mom, I only had 1 peso. I cannot eat siopaw and without a coke, and a coke without shop." So looking back, it sounds funny now, but it kind of started this resilience. Like, I can survive, right? If it's all about critical thinking, and my stomach usually is the one that dictates the solution, right? It's not the logical part. But
Mm.
looking back in those early grade 2, grade 3, I tell this story with all my reunion friends that grew up in kindergarten, and they said, "Yeah, Richard, we remember you. You you used to go around and just steal everybody's lunch." But for me, it was just part of the process. So anyway, I don't want to say, but on Edo's comment, there were one that really resonated to me, and that is, when I hire people, I always look for 3 things. And I think, Avi, you heard this before, right? Number one, I look for somebody that has played sports, because that shows teamwork. Somebody that has struggled and been able to overcome challenges, because that means that they're quite resilient and they're survivalists, like I am with the Siopaw and the Pepsi and the Coke. But the
Mhm.
third thing is, I always look for military experience, because that shows discipline, right? And so for me, those are the 3 trifecta that I always look when I hire people, not just in the Philippines, all over the world. Because going to military, just like Edo has gone, it just instills to you a certain amount of ethics, a certain amount of discipline, and a certain amount of values that cannot be replicated. So I just wanted to kind of comment on those 2 things. Now I'm going to answer your question. So what was the question again?
The question is, what role does your upbringing, your educational background, the societal norms have had in the way that you decide as a leader?
There is one specific instance where my integrity was called to task. And this was when I was vice president of sales, global sales for a software company out of Canada. And what we sell are surveillance software. So I was VP of sales for surveillance software that has intelligent. It has facial recognition. It has license plate recognition. So we use this all over the world. Some in prisons, Edo. Some in prisons. So, um, of course, I have deals all over the world. And in one instance, one of this deal came in to me. It was a fairly large deal, but it was from a country that was renowned for human rights violation.
Mm.
And I struggle with this, and I had to kind of escalate it to my management and say, "Listen, you know what? This is a fairly big deal, fairly large order. It will really make our year." But there were a couple of things that was bothering me. Number one, it was from a country that was renowned for human rights violation. And number two, we had an inkling that it was going to be used towards further to monitor these people
Violations.
that they're violating. And so we struggled. I struggled, right? Like, I had a lot of dissenting votes in my team, including my superiors, in terms of what to do. But at the end, I kind of forced my opinion and said, "Listen, I don't think this is the right thing to do. I think we have to make sure that we set the tone in terms of our values and our company's values." And at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, the front page rule. If this goes through and my mom reads this, how am I going to be
Yeah.
able to defend the fact that I supported this country that had human rights violation? But I didn't kind of explain that to them. But at the end of
Yeah.
the day, we decided to turn down the deal, and that was probably, I remember that specifically as a huge test, right? A huge test in terms
Mm.
of how integrity and my own values was called to task. I feel comfortable of that decision now, but at that point it was a struggle.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard, for sharing that. My next question, actually, you've already answered. And maybe we can start with Edo by sharing a moment where your personal values were tested as a leader. And I'm sure, having worked with government and, in the sector that you are serving, there were a couple of times when, there are some challenges with your values. Can you tell us about one time when that happened to you?
Yeah, actually, that question reminded me of our think subject in bridging leadership. It's GBV, giving voice to values, and how
Giving,
do we give
yes.
voice to our values? I think for me, early on when I was starting to implement somehow Second Chance Philippines in 2019, because in the entire country there's no program about reintegration for this kind of people. That's why we're like the pioneer, and even in my agency, they told me somehow they just laugh at me on the work that we do,
Mm,
and they said that it won't really not work and it will not really be successful. With all this kind of noise and distractions, I just continued our work, and at the same time really invested much of that kind of resistance in our agency. Right now, I'm glad to share that the BGMP had drafted its strategic roadmap, dubbed as Jail Plan 2040. It's actually a journey for innovation and advancement, long-term development plan. And right now, we were able to put the integration as a core function already of our agency. And it's already a big win in the for the entire country, because BGMP
yeah.
has transitioned from being hesitant to implement this kind of work, because before BGMP would always say that the integration is not our core function, it's the function of other agency. That social divide, that gap that we have, especially on reintegration, was really crucial, because I wanted to have that sense of community awareness for these people. So right now, I'm very much happy that we're able to, despite of that noise of somehow really questioning me of why I'm doing this, just because I wanted to be promoted or something. But they've learned that throughout. I think Second Chance is already more than 5 years right now, registered at the Securities and Exchange Commission as a non-profit organization with board of trustees, and the work does not stop, and we're still looking up on being able to somehow have a jail integration in our country, because what we have right now is we have a fragmented correctional system. We have a bureau of correction, we have PNP lockup jail, NBI lockup jail. So we wanted to harmonize this kind of program so that we could later on we have a department of correction in the entire country, and at the same time we could have already that also strategic focus. I think what I wanted really to say is there are times that people will just laugh at us on what we're doing right now. It's just not a matter of not stopping and being able
Yeah.
laserly focus on what we're doing right now. I think that's I
That's
think the moments that really tested me, because of course it's not really easy. This kind of people, you really have to have selection, you have to convince employers to hire this kind of people. Being able to build that ecosystem, enabling ecosystem for this kind of people, I think it's more than already a win for us.
what a great show of resilience, and congratulations, Edo, on that update. That's progress, definitely. That reminded me of, as someone said, if nobody is laughing at your dreams, then you're not dreaming big enough. So you're definitely dreaming big, and it's such an inspiration. Thank you, Edo. What about you, Rip? Can you share a moment where your personal values were tested as a leader?
Well, I guess it's not a moment, but I guess the leadership setup, or in a Filipino setting, no, you'd always have to be aware of, Filipinos are also known for having good relationships, or in Tagalog we call it pakikisama, right?
Pakikisama, yeah.
So as a leader, you would have to always be aware of situations where that pakikisama part, which is, as Richard said, our traits are a double-edged sword, right? That you would have to remind yourself and always be mindful that there are boundaries, right? In that pakikisama,
Mm,
and having core values in a company and having personal core values, you can't compromise this, because that's where team members or employees always have to go back to it. You always go back to the values, because that's your foundation.
yeah.
That's so I guess in situations that, as a leader, even as simple as tardiness, right? That there's always going to be an excuse of a person being tardy. And what's good that was reiterated to me in the Geese project seminar that we had was you have to separate the behavior from the character, right?
Character.
I've been again using that wherein, if somebody's late, you have to call it out, right? You have to call it out because our core values is based on this, or say integrity, etc.
Richard, any comments on what have been shared by Edo and Rip?
Like I said, I answered my own personal question, but one thing about that I could just suggest is it's very difficult to do the right thing, right? And that's why one of the things that we kind of really try to teach is courage as a leader.
Mm,
Because, deep inside, you're doing the right thing, but when everybody else is saying another thing, it's so easy to not just stick out and just have groupthink and just follow what everybody else is saying. And so I have to kind of commend you guys in the sense that leadership is lonely. Like, for anybody thinks that leadership, the right leadership for that matter, is about being popular, which we tend to kind of emulate here in the Philippines, but true leadership in its true form is very lonely, because if you do it the right way, where you actually lead based on your values, in some cases you're the only one standing, right? So you have to find that confidence, you have to find that resolve. And to Edo's story, where everybody else is laughing at him, it's just, you just have to find that resolve, and the one that will always bring you back is the values that your parents taught you, right? It's that, regardless of what happens, I'm true to myself, that I'm following what I think is the right thing. And we always have a saying, it's never the wrong time to do the right thing.
yeah. And just dovetailing on what you're saying, Richard. So all three of you seem like you have a really strong hold of who you are and what your values are. How then do you ensure that the team remains, or your teams remain motivated by your purpose, your organization's purpose? Maybe we can start with Richard.
Okay, so I love this question because I wanted to kind of show you something that I've kept for over 34 years. It's like a nameplate that I got from Hewlett
Mm-hmm.
Packard when I was hired in about 30, 40 years ago. And it shows on one way what is the HP way, but the other side is the values, right? The values, the it says the values, the objectives, and the practices. And this was early 90s, right? And I've always kept this because it's always guided me in terms of going back to the root reason why, what influences my leadership style. And it's a roundabout way of answering you, Awi, in the sense that every time I lead a team, I make sure that I remind them of the values and the principles of our company. And it's not just,
Mm-hmm.
and you heard me say this, I'm not trying to kind of belittle the mission, vision, and values. It's really important because obviously it resonated with me over 34 years. But more importantly, it's more important to weave that in as part of your daily leadership style. So whenever somebody is went above and beyond the call of duty, I commend them and I correlate it to the values that they're exemplifying. But when somebody steps out of line, I call them, but I also call them on the fact that they're not exemplifying the values that we as a company believe in. And so what it does is it becomes so ingrained in the way we do business, it becomes seamless. The challenge we have in some companies is it stays on the wall, it's written on the wall, and it stays on the wall, right? It never really permeates all the way to how we behave. And sometimes that is an opportunity lost by companies, because I think companies can be much more effective, leaders can be much more effective in terms of really guiding their team if they really create that direct connection between the values that
Mm-hmm.
they have and the way that they are managing their teams.
Thank you, Richard. What do you say about that, Edo? How do you ensure that your team remains motivated by the organization's purpose? Meron kang dalawa. So you have your BJMP leadership, and then you also have your Second Chance Philippines
Yeah,
leadership.
yeah. Actually, before to answer that, I think I got something when Sir Richard said about leadership is a lonely place. It's a lonely journey, and it's a difficult one. Yeah, I could attest to that. And at the same time, I remember, I think, a book of Professor Ron Heifetz. He is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. I think it's more about having that leadership on the line. And then I remember there was about the origin of leadership. I think the word it's really, I think to go for it or
To
something to
die.
die.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's not really for the faint-hearted. Answering that question right now about motivating the team in the government, especially being really a role model, because we have to admit that working the government is really very difficult. Oftentimes, I wanted really to have an optional retirement because I'm already 12 years in the
Mhm.
government, and
Mm.
just 8 years I could already opt to optional retirement and just to not really work already in the government and to find another job or just to not really help. But sometimes I question also my values. And I think in terms of motivating that team, especially in the BGM and Second Chance Philippines, it reminded me of Simon Sinek. I think you start with Y, especially the Golden Circle, the famous in I think in YouTube talk. It's more about really reminding our team our why. Why do we do this kind of people? Of course, we wanted to create an employment. We wanted to erase
Right.
poverty. We don't want this kind of people to go back to jails later on. We want them to really have a good life. And through these reminders and being grounded with our common goal to be able to employ this kind of people, I think our employees is actually our volunteers also, especially the team, they have that kind of sense of purpose intact. They have that
Mm.
why that they're always reminded of because we wanted really to somehow send the children of PDL to school to really give them a new life later on. Because without them giving them dignity through employment, they will just go back to jail. Because
Yeah.
the in jail they have food, they have security, they are guided 24/7. So I think it's more
Right.
about being able to really remind the team that they are part of something bigger and
Yeah.
they have that kind of sense of purpose and our mission to really help this kind of people out.
Yeah, and more than just bricklayers, no, they're actually building a big building or a church or a cathedral. Yeah, very good reminder. Rip?
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind actually here for me, no, is this word in leadership called buy-in, right? Because buy-in means that they actually go with the flow of what the organization wants to become, right? And what I've learned, because I'm a student of leadership, and I've always been open to reading books on leadership, is that the buy-in has to be with the leader first before they buy in
Mm.
organizational purpose, right? So as a leader, you have to become it, right? You have to become the
Right.
example. That's why leadership is not easy, right? There's a saying in success that the rent is due every day. As a leader, I think the rent is also due every day because you cannot put on pause the role of a leader, right? Maybe the pause is that when you have time to rest or you have your own me time. But even so, with our dynamic demands of companies now, and then us being also in a logistic part of the business, is where I'm always on call. Right? It has to start from the leader. It has to start from the leaders. And even culture, I believe, are dictated by the leaders. So if the
Yeah.
leaders live up to the purpose, then that energy and light overflows with the people around you. And Filipinos, I guess, are very sensitive that, if boss does this, if our boss actually or our leader does this, then we have to do this as well. So, example, the leader has to be on the ground. The leader always has to be ready to do the things that he has to do. If the leader is not going to do it, then who else will do it, right? So you have to step up and be in the front lines at times that when you have to be in the front lines. And yeah, in regards to purpose and vision, I read this book before called The E-Myth. Forgot the author, but there's this part in that book who talks about IBM. And IBM, when they wrote their mission and vision, they didn't write it in future tense. They wrote it in present tense, saying
Present.
that we will become the best information technology hardware company. When they wrote it as we are
We are.
the
Mhm.
number one in software or hardware, as IBM's hardware, I believe. So by just shifting that to the present moment, you're actually already doing your best to become already now what you actually
Mhm.
are aiming for, right? So when you do that, you're actually already doing your best to manifest it at the present moment. And if people
Right.
actually do that, you immediately raise the standard, right? You practice what you would like to become at the present moment and try to instill that as yourself and pass it on to the people you're actually leading or the organization you're actually bringing to that purpose or vision or so yeah so
Mhm.
I can
Yeah,
say
your line about setting an example reminds me of the saying, values are caught and not taught. No, you can't teach people values. You have to model them, especially as in the context of leadership. Thank you
yes
for
yeah,
that, Rip.
let me
parenting,
let,
right?
let me kind of add to
That's
that,
right.
because
Yeah.
Rip just is just like a wealth of a wealth of lead in to my comments. I think part of that is and you've heard me say this. I've been recorded to do this. Is as a leader, don't ask anything from your team that you're not willing to do.
Willing to do. Yeah.
Right, and I think that's a very simple rule of thumb, but it gives you so much more credibility in terms of your team. And to Rip's point, you don't have to kind of tell them, you just have to show them. And I think that behavior, whether it's be conscious or not conscious, it's part of the whole message you're delivering. The second thing is that, and I've said this all the time, the bigger on what's at stake, the more that the leader needs to be the first through the door. And sometimes I find that leaders in the Philippines tend to stay back and let somebody else
Mm,
lead through the door because they don't want to mapahiya. Sige, tingnan mo muna dyan. Baka naman tayo hindi ganon. Saka na lang ako dadating pag, okay na. So that really lessens your credibility, right? So I said, the bigger the battle, the bigger the conflict, I want to be first through the door as a leader, right? Because I
right.
want to make sure that the team understands that I have their back. And the other thing is the fact that I'm leading by example. Leading by example, and to support Rip's point, is so important. A lot of our leaders sometimes don't lead by example. And in
Mm,
the process, by not leading by example, it gives permission to the rest of the team to also not lead by example, right? And so there's so much responsibility if you want to be a good leader.
that's right. And I just like to also catch what Edo shared earlier when he was vulnerable enough and brave enough to share that there were times when he wanted to quit and consider other opportunities outside of his current role, and that sometimes does happen to us. Like, we do get tired sometimes, so it's very important also that as leaders we know how to take care of ourselves. There have been a lot of advices coming from all the sharings that you've given, but there's just one last question before we get into the rapid fire questions. What advice would you give to leaders aiming to make social impact? I'd like to highlight how this question is really not just about achieving your organizational goals, because that's a given, right? As leaders, we lead our teams to meet organizational goals. But the question is specific to making social impact. So, what advice would that be? Maybe we can start with Rip and then Edo, and we'll end with Richard. Rip?
This question actually reminds me of a song of Michael Jackson, which is called "The Man in the Mirror."
Man in the mirror,
I
yeah.
thought you said bad.
That too, or the Thriller, right?
In some cases.
Sorry, Rip. Go ahead.
With the Thriller outfit of Michael Jackson. No, no. I mean, the Man in the Mirror. There's this part, the lyrics that says that if you want to make the world a better place,
Better place.
take a look at yourself and make that change. Right. So I guess as a person or as a person who wants to be his highest self, and I guess leaders have to be in their highest self as much as they can all the time. That's why it's not easy to be a leader, right? Because we're only
Mhm.
human. We're not AI robots yet. So I guess to make a social impact, you have to be it. You have to look inside of you and get that strength and make that change and live that higher self that a human person can be first and foremost. Just imagine if everyone does that. Just imagine that social,
Yeah.
if everybody would actually wake up one day and say that today I will be my highest self. I will do the things right. I will be the best of what a human should be. And going back to how that will impact, society is because you're living it. That energy is contagious, right? In your family, you live that higher self. That energy brings forth when you wake up in the morning, with your partner, with your kids, and they see that and they get that energy. That just resonates. Your kids go to
Yeah.
school with that energy. Your partner goes to the office. It's contagious. In an organization, you would also have to make your organization strong because you can't have a social impact if you don't work, you do the hard things, right? You work hard, make sure the business is profitable in the right way. And then that's the only time you can generate extra to actually help society. So it's actually for me really doing on a day-to-day basis what the corporation is set out to do on your personal level, doing what you are actually set out to do to improve yourself. It's a continuous kaizen, a continuous improvement.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be the foundation of whatever social impact you would like to give out. And there's so many in the Philippines. We have a lot of work to do. We have so much work to do. I mean, kids have to be educated. Kids have to out there have to be nourished. There's a lot
Mm.
poverty there, children sometimes because we donated this drinking fountain, they sometimes go to school without even rice in their lunchbox. And,
Yeah.
that's why when I see what's happening now, in Congress or in Senate, this circus happening, and how they actually spend taxpayers' money, you just really get frustrated. And some people know that, a lot of people are having a hard time nowadays, with inflation, with, what's happening.
Right.
uh, I guess we live in this world, so we just have to start with ourselves first.
Yes. Very clear call to action. Thanks, Rip. Edo?
Yeah, I was reminded of the man in the mirror. I think it's more about also like the saying of Nelson Mandela when he said that one of the most difficult thing is not to change society but to change oneself. I think it's
Mm.
more on personal. In the academy, we have this kind of live knowledge that says that cadetship is but a grim struggle of winning supremacy over oneself. Basically, it's actually yourself. I think to leaders aspiring for social impact, you really need to focus on yourself first, and at the same time, know your passion. And
Mm.
passion is what gives us deep joy and a sense of meaning, and being able to find your vocation or purpose. I have one favorite theologian in the name of Friedrich Buechner. He said, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger is met." I think it's being able to really where you can respond when where are you needed the most. You really have to have that self-reflection. In bridging leadership in AIM, we call it inner work.
Mm.
It's actually a gateway to being able to have that systems thinking later on. Inner work is more about intentional, transformative process within ourselves, knowing our beliefs, our assumptions, our why. And I think these are important because if you know all these things, if your values are clear, you're able to really align with that kind of leadership that you wanted to really, and at the same time, convert it into service, tangible
Mhm.
service to the community. I think I go back to being able to really lead yourself first if you wanted to
Yeah.
make a social impact, Awi.
Thank you, Edo. And Richard?
Yeah, so earlier, I'm not sure, Awi, whether you remember, I used to end my presentation with this quote from Mahatma Gandhi, right? Which is, you
Mm,
must be the change you want to see
in
in
the
your
world,
life,
yeah.
right? If you want to, and I think that kind of captures what everybody's saying is you have to lead by example. And I have so many things that when we teach the course that supports this, and one of them is the fact that it's time to stop being bystanders and be part of the solution. And I think it speaks to the impact that a leader can have. The reason why I came back to the Philippines and really started the Geese project was that aspiration that we can make a change, right? The fact that there is hope for the Philippines, the fact that given the right guidance, the right teaching, that people will gravitate towards doing the right thing. And Rip's point is really valid. We have a lot of problems. But if you think about the current situation of our country, the current state of our country, a leader decided where we are right now at some level, whether it be the government, whether it be the private, whether mid-level, we be a PNP, a leader decided that. And that speaks to the quality of leadership that we have. And so the positive message that we have is if we can just change the 1% of those leaders that are in the position to be good leaders and really have a social impact, cascade all the way down to every level of a society, then there is hope for our country.
Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insights this morning. Now, before I let you all go, here are three rapid fire questions that we ask our guests in our podcast. Are you ready for them?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, first question. Let's just make it light. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why? Who would like to start? Kanina pa ako nagdidikta eh, who's going to speak when.
I'll start. I'll start. So
Sige.
there's the one I always admired is Colin Powell. Colin Powell was the general in the U.S. Army and was the Joint Chief of Staff, and unfortunately he's passed away. And he had 13 lessons in leadership, and that kind of started me in this whole quest in terms of how to be a really effective leader. And part of the reason why he kind of resonated the most is a lot of his leadership lessons were values driven, right? Like it really
Mm,
captured, and it's really anchored towards integrity. And you can see that, and I'll give you an example in one of his lesson. It says, being responsible sometimes means you're going to piss people off. And he talks straight from the heart in the sense that that's true. One of the challenges that we have sometimes as leaders, Filipino leaders, is we always want to be liked. We always want to for people to not have conflict, and in the process we kind of dilute the message, and which ends up with a lot of miscommunication as opposed to kind of laying it out and truly saying the right thing. And that kind of enables us to be very clear, very concise, but also very, very effective in the way we communicate. And so, for me, if I had a chance to sit down with someone, it would be Colin Powell.
Thank you, Richard. Si Colin Powell. Siya siguro si Powell Station sa San Francisco. Well, anyway, sa train station, merong Powell. I've always wondered, sino ba tong Powell na to? That's probably him. Edo, what about you? Ay,
I think
nagdikta na naman ako. Sorry.
yeah, it's okay. I think it's not he is not yet historical because I think he's still gaining grounds on leadership. I think it would be one of my favorite lately is Simon Sinek. I really admire the way he articulate about these things about leadership and being able to somehow really inspire a lot of people. And I think being able to have a coffee with him, not using the ceramic cup but just the styrofoam cup, I think it would be much more enjoyable because I love the way he explained about leadership in authority and leadership without authority. We've seen it right now in what is happening in the typhoon in
Christine,
Bicol,
yeah.
yeah, in other places. So there are leaders without authority, but these leaders are symbols that we have for our country. As what Sir Richard said, there's always hope for the Philippines. Even what I said earlier that sometimes and most of the times, and I acknowledge that feeling being able to really opt out to have an optional retirement because really very, very difficult to work in the government
Yeah.
to operate into this kind of places, being able not to be contaminated, very, very difficult. And I think
Right.
it gives me, I'm just blessed because I have that capacity building on the leadership journey that I had, and always go back to my wife. Thank you, Awi. I think that's all.
Thank you, Edo. Just know that I keep on cheering you on. And I acknowledge the impact that you've been making in the communities that you serve. And Rip,
Yeah,
historical figure.
there's so many actually, but if I would be put inside a time machine and travel back into history, I would go back 2 centuries ago and have dinner with our historical Jesus. Just imagine the number of Christians now in the world, right? Which, as history says, started with the 12 apostles. There may be 13, I don't know, probably 14, but it wouldn't probably be a bunch of 2,000 more, right? And I've always been intrigued with the religion that they turned into the Roman Catholic Church, but it started with one man. In fact, Christians were persecuted during the time of the Romans, right? And then eventually, Jesus Christ was turned into a religion. But I read also books about Christianity and I have a number of books about Jesus. And there's also this portion that there's this lost years of Jesus. But if you take a look at what a leader should be, I guess really go deep, deep inside of our soul and who we are. He has a lot to teach us, and I guess we wouldn't be this many Christians now if what he represented or how he lived his life is really something that's just down to the core of creation, right? Of what the universe is about. So yeah, I can go on and on, but
Yeah. Thank you, Rommel. We share the same person that we want to have a sit down with.
yeah.
Next question. What one book or movie that has significantly influenced your leadership style? Nag-iisip pa si Richard.
Oh, me. Okay.
Oh, sure.
No. There's not one book. There's a lot of books, but what if I look at my leadership style, and you guys know this, is the fact that I'm a product of maybe 10 different mentors that I had through my life, right? And that really kind of formed my leadership style. And I can very distinctly remember all 10 of them or 11 of them in terms of what they kind of imparted with me. And so I'm not as much a believer of a specific book, a specific thing to guide me, but leadership is a journey. And the product that who I am today as a leader is as a result of all these contributions of these people along the way that was unselfishly kind of mentored me and said, Richard, we'll take you under our wing. This is how you do it. And if there's anything that I would like to see in the Philippines is this attitude, which is consistent with the Geese mentality. I find that sometimes certain situations, somebody comes into work, is a new guy, people are not willing to help them, to train them, because there's this crab mentality that thinks about, pag natuto yan, kukunin niya yung trabaho natin. And so I never got that anywhere else with the leaders that I was and the managers that I had. And so I think the full gratification of a leader is when you impart your knowledge, and then eventually when your own student becomes a leader themselves. And I think that whole mentality and that whole approach, and that's my aspiration towards the Filipinos, is at some point we have so much knowledge that we can impart to each other, and if we can just kind of be more open, more giving, I think we will go a further way than what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So more than books, it's your mentors or your flock of
Yeah,
mentors,
I find
Richard,
that
is what you're saying.
we
Yeah.
don't mentor enough in the Philippines, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like we keep our knowledge to ourselves, and then in the process it dies with us, right? Whereas, if you give it to somebody else, they put their own flavor and they enhance it more than I've ever done it. And so it's a
Right.
domino effect. And so I've seen it, I've experienced it, and it's unfortunately, it's until such time that we have enough people that are kind of evangelizing on this, it's very difficult. It's so counterintuitive to our culture
Yeah.
because we grew up in this crab mentality.
Thanks, Richard. Edo?
Yeah,
One book or movie that has significantly influenced your leadership style.
yeah. It's not more about, I think, a book, because there's no book about it. It's basically, before, I have a lot of leadership framework, but what is more powerful that have been introduced to us, especially when I had my bridging leadership in 2019, was the bridging leadership framework. It's about ownership, co-ownership, and co-creation. So developed by Synergos, and at the same time implemented by AIM here in Asia through military peace buildings operations, being guided by this framework. And somehow, if you really implement it, it will somehow really change your leadership style in a way that you could never imagine, because there are things that you are willing to do as a leader that push you to your limits, because you wanted to have these new institutional arrangements later on for the government, to have that social inequity, to have that quality already equally. But on terms of books, I think more about the practice of adaptive leadership. Basically,
Mm.
being able to distinguish what is adaptive and what is a technical leadership problem. So these are the things that actually have been guiding me.
Thanks, Edo. And Rip?
No, gosh, I love books.
You do. Ang hirap ba? Ang hirap
I
i-narrow
was
down.
here with my family, and we were talking about attachment. Then they asked me a question: "What are you attached to?" I'm just attached to my books. So, I mean, I came upon this book when I was, I think, a teenager. Luckily, in my uncle's house. It's called University of Success, written by the great Ogmandino, who wrote The Greatest Salesman in the World. And I've always carried that. I always had that. In fact, I have an old version. And just, I think 3 weeks ago, when I went to Fully Book, I saw the same new book. I bought it though. It's orange. I had the blue one. It's really brown already. These are the old school leaders, right? I mean, these are like chapters from Napoleon Hill, Dale Carnegie. I guess in some way that started me off into becoming a better version of yourself, and that's one book. I'm naming two. So
Ang
and
daya naman ni Rep, dalawa oh.
the leadership book I always go back to, the great John Maxwell, in his book called 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. In the chapter 2, it talks about influence, and I guess that's the true measure, as he says, the true measure of leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So, and the big question is, how do you influence, right? And I guess we
Mm.
a lot about how we can influence, and basically one of the levels reaching, he has like 5 levels, and one important thing is really credibility. So the way to influence is you have to have credibility, you have to have buy-in, meaning the integrity is there, and that's very important in leadership. So I can still name so many books that like
Yeah, I'm sure that will be perfect for the next set of podcasts that we're going to have. Ako din, actually nainggit ako. I wanted to
I'll
also share one book lang, one book. I read this when I was in college, or yeah, early in my career. It's The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And the four agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. And I know that I'm still a work in progress just by thinking about all these four agreements. But the one that's most challenging for me, which I'm still also working on, is being impeccable with my word. I mean, as leaders, we need to be very careful about what we say and what we do, because what we say and what we do actually influence how, even, well, Rip was talking about energies earlier, even the energy in the room and the energy of the people around you. We take that for granted, and words have power, such power that it can actually make or break someone's day. Now, down to the last question of the rapid fire questions. If you had to describe your leadership philosophy in one word, what would it be? Oh, one word lang ha. one word to describe your leadership philosophy, what would it be? Sino sa inyo may one word na?
Ako,
Sige.
authenticity. Authenticity.
Okay, authenticity. Thanks, Richard. What about you, Do?
I think impact.
Impact. Thank you. And Rommel? Rip?
I would go for integrity.
Integrity. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your positive energies with me today. And this podcast is really about being purpose-driven leaders, and I'm sure our audience has learned so much from you. Lastly, may your flock expand and may you continue your paths to your purpose. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arun.